On June 4th, 1989, a boater spots something floating in Tampa Bay. At first, he thinks it's debris, but as his boat gets closer, he realizes it's not. It's a body. And then another and another. 3 women bound, gagged, and weighed down. And just like that, Tampa Bay goes from a summer paradise to the center of one of Florida's most chilling murder investigations. Hey guys, I'm Llama, and welcome to the very first episode of Devil in the Bay, our multi-part deep dive into the case of Oba Chandler and the murders of the Rogers family. We're talking about a mom and her 2 teenage daughters who were just on vacation. They had no idea that accepting help from a friendly stranger would seal their fate. Some of the details in this case will stay with you long after you hear them. So, let's get into it. Hal and Joe Rogers and their 2 beautiful daughters, Michelle and Christe, were the typical rural Ohio farmer family. Each of them were hardworking, salt-of-the-earth kind of people, and everyone had their roles to play when it came to milking the cows and tending to the fields. Hal and Joe made a decent living and were very proud of their self-sufficiency and of the care they showed the animals. They all pushed themselves, but none pushed harder than Joe. "She could work me under the table," Hal said. Her name was Joan, but no one really called her that. She was always just Joe. She was thin with soft brown hair and shaded glasses that, like her husband's, hid her eyes just a little. But that's where the similarities ended. While Hal was quiet and reserved, Joe could talk to anyone. No one was a stranger for too long. Hal used to joke that Joe was his personality. She grew up just a few miles away on a farm in the same county. Even as a little girl, Joe had a streak of charm and creativity. She dressed the family cat in baby clothes and wheeled it around in a stroller like a doll. Life on the farm was sheltered and maybe a little lonely, but things moved fast after high school. She and Hal had dated as teenagers, and not long after graduation, and after discovering she was pregnant with their daughter Michelle, they got married. It was a church wedding, but her parents were so ashamed they refused to let her wear a wedding gown, and they banned her from inviting her friends to the reception. Their honeymoon was just a weekend in Fort Wayne, Indiana. A couple nights at the Hospitality Inn. Not much, but it was something. But somehow, Joe found ways to make life bright. She had a loud, infectious laugh. She loved dancing, country music, and made a killer potato soup. She and Hal owned a Honda Goldwing motorcycle, and she loved riding behind them, wind in her face, arms wrapped around the man she built a life with. Joe, though, was no pushover. She was strong-willed, independent, and unafraid to speak her mind. She listened to Hal, respected him, but if he said something dumb, and he did, she could shut him down with just a look. She made him take her out to dinner just so they could talk about something besides cows and corn. She teased him for his terrible singing, and she left him cards that said, "I love you." She was tough, but under that toughness was something rare, a kind of steady light that didn't burn out, no matter what life threw at her. Even in the months before she left for Florida, Joe was still dreaming. She was still hoping. She was talking about having another baby. Now, Michelle was the kind of girl who made people look twice. Some said she was pretty. Others said she was beautiful. She had long, wavy brown hair, a quiet, cautious smile, and dark eyes that somehow managed to be both playful and haunting. Michelle had that teenage magic, the ability to shift to become someone new depending on the moment. Sometimes, without her makeup, she looked like a kid, just another middle schooler with soft features and shy energy. But other times, when she dressed up or tilted her head just right, she could pass for someone 10 years older. A young woman with secrets, a girl who had already seen too much. And maybe she had. There was a part of Michelle that just felt out of reach, like something essential had been tucked away somewhere private, somewhere fragile. And maybe that's what life had already taught her to do. You could see it in the quiet way she moved through the world, in the shadows already gathering beneath her eyes, though she was just 17. At Crestview High School, she had just finished her junior year. She was an average student, known for being a little shy and a little wild. Around strangers, she could be reserved, quiet, even withdrawn. But around people she trusted, she could be bold. She could laugh, flirt, even drop into a boy's lap like nothing in the world could hurt her. She wasn't reckless, not really, but she liked to toe the line. She smoked sometimes, and at parties, when her classmates drank cheap beer, Michelle drank wine coolers. She sat in the back of the school bus with the aggro boys, probably listening to their crude jokes, but never moved seats. And because high school is high school, she got a bit of a reputation. People whispered, rumors spread. Michelle knew it. She even joked about it with her friends. She acted like she didn't care, but inside, there was something softer, something bruised, a deeper vulnerability that didn't match the stories told about her. She wrote little notes about feeling lonely. She dreamed about the future, sometimes big dreams like going to college and becoming a vet, leaving the farm life behind forever. Other times, she pictured staying, getting married, raising a family. Her dreams shifted a bit like she did. She was still a girl in so many ways. She wore 4 rings on her left hand, 2 gold, 2 silver, because she liked the way they looked. Her room was covered in unicorn posters. She loved Bazooka bubblegum, Madonna, Guns N' Roses, and driving up and down Main Street on warm weekend nights. If there was a school dance, she made sure to stop at her grandparents' house first so they could see her all dressed up. And during county fair season, she'd sleep in the barn with the animals she was showing because she loved them that much. She felt safe there. When Michelle left for Florida, she had a boyfriend, Jeff Feasby. They'd only been together a few weeks, but it felt like something real. They'd started talking after prom because neither of them had a date that night, and by sunrise, they were a couple. Jeff gave her his class ring. Michelle didn't wear it, though, because she was scared of losing it while working in the barn, so she kept it tucked safely in her purse, like it was precious, like it meant something, and maybe it did. They were a good match. They'd known each other since 7th grade, started off as friends, and there was honesty between them, respect. Jeff had heard whispers, the way people do in small towns, rumors about her uncle, about something bad, something she never brought up. And so he didn't ask. He just stayed close because sometimes that's all you can do. Now, Christe Rogers was just 14 and had wrapped up her 8th grade year at Crestview Junior High. Too young to date, too young to drive, too young for any of the things her older sister Michelle had already lived through. but old enough to feel the weight of being the little sister. There was something about her lightness, a kind of joy that the world hadn't managed to take from her yet. Where Michelle had grown wary and guarded, Christe was still open, still bold. She was more cheerful and more carefree. Yes, the family had been through a lot, but on the surface, Christe seemed to have survived it with her sparkle intact. She was still the beaming cheerleader, still the girl with the big laugh and even bigger bangs. I mean, it was the 80s. Everyone called her bubbly, but she had boundaries, and she enforced them. If boys made rude comments, she shut them down. If they touched her, she made it clear they weren't going to do it twice. Every morning, just by showing up, Christe sent a message. I'm not my sister. I am my own story. She'd taken on the role, or maybe been assigned it, of the good girl in the Rogers family. She leaned right into it, and she wore it well. Christe rode a motor scooter, and she loved to roller skate. She played catcher on the softball team, fearless behind the plate, to the point where the umpire had to remind her to give the batter some space. She was small, maybe 5'1" on a good day, but she made herself look taller with an epic 4-inch wall of bangs held up by a heroic amount of gel and clouds of hairspray. She wore friendship bracelets, pink and green and white, owned way too many teddy bears, played the saxophone and bit her nails, and during morning chores, when it was time to get up early for the cows, Christe was always the last one out of bed. But the place she never lagged behind was at her father's side. Christe and Hal had always been close. When she was little, she'd follow him everywhere, out to the fields, into the cab of the combine. She'd sit on the heater and sing little songs to him while he worked. That bond never broke. Even as she grew, she was still his shadow, still his little girl. Hal loved both his daughters, of course, but with Christe, it was different. She had his smile, his warmth. Michelle was quiet like him, but Christie's charm pulled him in. He didn't even try to hide it. He adored her, and Michelle noticed. But here's what matters. Despite all that, the resentment, the rivalry, the invisible lines drawn between them, Michelle protected Christe, always and forever. This is the most important thing to know about Michelle Lee Rogers, a quiet girl from Van Wert County who never made it to the 12th grade, who sat in the back of the bus and never found her way up front, who craved love and belonging and never quite got enough of either. Even when she was hurting, even when she was trapped in silence, scared and alone, she looked out for Christe. When no one else knew what was happening behind closed doors, Michelle did. She watched. She worried. She tried to keep her sister away from their uncle. She paid attention. She kept Christe safe. In the middle of the worst years of her life, Michelle somehow found the strength to protect the one person who still had light in her eyes. And that is proof of the light that still lived in Michelle. No matter how dark things got, it wasn't gone. So if you remember anything about her, remember this. Michelle didn't just survive. She shielded. And for a time, that was enough to keep Christe whole. Now, I don't really want to talk about this piece of shit, but unfortunately, he is part of the reason we're here tonight, telling this tragic story. There's no easy way to talk about what happened with John Rogers. To the outside world, he was Hal's younger brother, his farming partner, his neighbor. He lived in a trailer just a stone's throw from the house. He worked the fields alongside Hal and Joe, ate dinner with them, and was around their children almost every day. But folks in Van Wert had always said John was different. He wore army fatigues, talked about covert missions for the CIA, claimed connections to the Secret Service. Most just figured he was eccentric, a bit odd, but harmless. Until March 1988. That's when deputies arrived at the farm with a warrant. John was arrested and taken into custody, accused of the sexual assault of a woman who lived in his trailer. The woman had once dated John, but now they were just sharing space. She told police that one evening she had come back to the trailer and been attacked by a man in a mask who handcuffed and blindfolded her and threatened her with a knife. When she reported the assault, the woman told detectives that she thought her attacker was John. She heard his voice and that the rape had been videotaped. The detectives got a warrant and searched the trailer and found it inside a briefcase, a video of the rape. But that wasn't all. Shortly after John was taken to jail, the detectives summoned Hal and Joe to the sheriff's department and sat them down. They had something to tell them. "We think Michelle's been assaulted," one of the detectives said. The briefcase in the trailer had not just contained the video of the woman's assault. It also contained pictures of Michelle, some of which showed her undressed and blindfolded. Searching the rest of the trailer and John's car, the detectives had also found audio tapes on which a girl who proved to be Michelle could be heard screaming and pleading with John to leave her alone. When the detectives asked her about the photos and the tapes, Michelle confirmed the worst. Her uncle, she said, had raped her repeatedly over the previous 2 years, starting when she was 14. Michelle said John had taken advantage of the times when Hal and Joe were away from the farm, off on weekend trips or other business. She said he had tied her hands and forced himself on her, threatening to kill her if she told anyone. Both Hal and Joe had noticed that Michelle seemed irritable and even nervous around John, that she didn't like to be alone with him in the milking parlor. Joe had tried to get Michelle to tell her what was wrong, but Michelle wouldn't say. Hal had written it off as a personality clash. "If I'd known what it was," Hal said, "I'd have killed the son of a bitch to start with." John, of course, denied everything, said it wasn't true, claimed it was all made up and that he was being framed. And somehow, the family fractured around those lies. Irene Rogers, Hal and John's mother, stood firmly by John. Even in the face of photos, tapes, and Michelle's statement, she called her granddaughter a liar. Hal was devastated. He couldn't understand how his own mother could turn her back on Michelle, and he cut off contact with his parents entirely. But Michelle, she just wanted to move on. She didn't want to talk about it. She wasn't interested in therapy. She didn't want to testify in court. At one point, she even said if the case went to trial, she'd leave town. She had already lived through the trauma. She didn't want to relive it again in front of strangers. Now Hal spiraled in the aftermath. He'd retreated to the trailer, the one John used to live in, and would lock himself inside for days at a time. Joe would knock on the door, gently try to pull him out, but he barely spoke. He didn't have the words. What do you say when the worst thing imaginable happened right in your own backyard? In the end, the whole thing went away, and Michelle was not asked to appear in court. John Rogers eventually pleaded no contest to the rape of the first woman and was sentenced to a prison term of 7 to 25 years. Given Michelle's reluctance to proceed further, the charges involving her were dropped. The assault of Michelle by her uncle and gossip by local people was one of the reasons for the Florida trip. Jo and her daughters wanted to distance themselves from the incident. Early on, when they were planning the trip, Jo and the girls had talked about visiting Gatlinburg or Gettysburg. Something easy, something close. Life on the farm had never been easy or light, and for once, they wanted something bigger, something far away. So they chose Florida. 1,000 miles of highway, sun, and sky. And it wasn't just a break from Ohio, but from everything. The pain, the headlines, the family fracture. The three of them wanted what every other tourist wants from the Sunshine State. They wanted to lie on the beach and shake Mickey's hand and throw away a few dollars on overpriced souvenirs. They wanted to let go, to be renewed, to lose themselves inside the myth. This was, after all, their very first real vacation. No fairgrounds, no roadside motels for livestock shows, no milking the cows early in the morning, just paradise. They planned this trip down to the minute, argued over which theme park to skip, scheduled time at a tanning salon just to get a head start on the golden glow. They were giddy. They didn't just want to see Florida, they wanted to feel free in it. The night before they left, Michelle said goodbye to her boyfriend, Jeff. They stood in the laundry room, just the two of them, and she started to cry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heavy. It was just real. For most people, a trip to Florida is a little thing. But for Michelle, for a girl who had been through more than most could carry, it probably felt like she was going to the other side of the world. Jo was still working the night shift up until the last minute, driving a forklift at Peyton's Northern over in Indiana. She came home just after dawn the morning they left, got a few hours of sleep while the girls finished packing. At 1 p.m. on Friday, May 26, 1989, the three of them piled into the family's Oldsmobile Calais, waved goodbye to Hal, and started their adventure. They were leaving the farm, leaving the sheriff's deputies and the counselors and the lawyers, searching for someplace warm and safe where they could hide and forget and find a way back to themselves for a whole week. Hal had wanted to come, but the farm wouldn't wait. 80 cows don't take vacations, and the spring rains had already delayed planting. Someone had to stay behind. So Jo and the girls went without him, determined to make it a trip they'd never forget. What they didn't know is that the rest of us would never forget it either. They brought a Nikon One Touch with them, a camera that would go on to capture their joy, their movement, their ordinary moments, the kind of snapshots that would become frozen in time, but not in photo albums, but in police files and newspaper archives. When they got to Florida, they went to the Jacksonville Zoo, then continued south to Silver Springs, where they took one of those iconic glass-bottom boat tours. A great deal of investigation would eventually be devoted to the question of how little experience the Rogers women had with boats and water. For the girls, at least, it was perhaps the very first time they had ever set foot on a boat. Neither girl was a confident swimmer, especially in water over their heads, and their mother could not swim at all. In fact, Jo was terrified of her face being covered by water or anything else. "Just pull the covers over her head," Hal said, "and you got a hell of a fight." But there they were, adrift on the water, staring down into the pale blue world below, hypnotized by the movement of grass and fish and light. For that 1 hour at least, they were far from everything that had happened, far from courtrooms, far from pain, far from the barn and the memories and the weight of silence they had carried for far too long. For just a little while, they were 3 women on vacation, trying to breathe again. And that was all they ever wanted, to get away, to feel the sun on their faces, to not be afraid. And that's the part that haunts us most, because they almost made it. That Sunday night, May 28th, they left Silver Springs and drove to Titusville near Cape Canaveral. The next day, Joe wrote a postcard to Hal, telling him how their vacation was and that the girls were dragging her everywhere. Michelle also wrote a postcard to Jeff Feasby. Jeff's birthday was coming up in a couple of days, and Michelle wanted to send him something. She chose a card adorned with one of the Sunshine State's most popular icons, the immortal, tacky image of a young woman in a bikini on all fours in the sand, laughing provocatively, despite the fact that a big bull gator is standing right behind her, its jaws wide open. "Fun times in Florida," is said beneath the photo. On the back of the card, Michelle wrote, "Hi, how's everything with you? I'm doing great. Yesterday, we went to the zoo in Jacksonville. I was visiting my relatives and we found Jeffrey, you. Later, we went to Silver Springs and rode a glass-bottom boat. Today, we're going to the beach and then to SeaWorld. You have fun at work and behave yourself. Have a great birthday. I'll be thinking of you. I miss you. Love ya, Shell." They spent the next 2 days going to SeaWorld, Epcot, and Disney's MGM Studios. On Thursday, June 1st, the Rogers women left Orlando and headed to Tampa, where they were thinking of seeing Busch Gardens and perhaps lying on the sandy Gulf beaches. They reached their hotel, the Days Inn at Rocky Point, just before 12:30 p.m. They checked in, picked up a brochure on Busch Gardens, and went to their room. Phone records put the time at 12:37 p.m. when Michelle placed a long-distance call to Jeff at the Union 76 gas station he worked at in Ohio. It was Jeff's birthday, and Michelle had arranged to have flowers and balloons sent to the gas station that morning. The two of them talked for close to 10 minutes. Michelle told him that the vacation was going well and they were having fun. Jeff could hear Joe saying hi to him in the background, and Michelle talked about how she and Christe wanted to go to the beach, but their mom wouldn't let them near deep water. Then she said goodbye. That was the last time Jeff would ever hear her voice again. After the phone call with Jeff, someone else, probably Joe, picked up the phone and dialed Busch Gardens. That's the last traceable plan we have. They never made it to the park, or if they did, they left behind no evidence. No ticket stubs, no gift shop bags, no snapshots of roller coasters or safari animals. Not a single photo of Michelle or Christe standing in front of the iconic monorail sign. Whatever they did that afternoon had been lost to time. Just another thread in the story that frays and disappears the closer you look. Except for one photograph. Just one. Michelle is sitting on the floor of the hotel room. She's wearing a blue bikini top, white shorts, and sandals. A peach blouse is draped across one arm. She might have been putting it on or taking it off. It's hard to tell. Her hair looks damp, her skin a little sunburned. Her rings catch the light glinting on her left hand. She's looking directly into the camera. Not smiling and not posing, just there. And there's something striking about her gaze, something that reaches across the decades and holds you in place. You don't know what she's thinking or what she was about to say, where she was about to go, but you can tell she wasn't done. She was in the middle of something, in the middle of being a daughter, a sister, a girl with rings on her fingers and sunburn on her shoulders, and plans that hadn't been carried out yet. It's such a small moment, but now it's everything. It's the last known photo of her. And maybe that's what makes it so hard to look at. In that single frame, frozen in time, feels like a whisper of everything that was supposed to come next and never did. Because when you know what happens later, it's impossible not to see this moment differently. Impossible not to wonder what was ahead of her when she stood up from that floor, what was coming, and whether somewhere inside she already knew. The Rogers women were last spotted eating dinner inside the restaurant at the Days Inn. Just a mother and her daughters on vacation, for once. A businessman from Houston staying there for a conference happened to sit nearby. He didn't mean to watch them, but they were right in front of him. Every time he looked up from his meal, there they were, 3 sun-kissed strangers laughing quietly among themselves. He couldn't hear what they were saying. Not really. Just the rhythm of their voices were light, familiar, comfortable. They seemed like a family that loved being together. A rare thing to witness, really. When their dinner was finished, the 3 stood up to leave. Michelle glanced over her shoulder, just for a moment. "Hi," she said softly, flashing a smile before walking away. It was so small, so ordinary, a polite hello, a fleeting kindness to a stranger she'd never know she moved. And then they were gone. Later that evening, one final photo was taken, the last frame on the last roll of film. It wasn't of them, but of the sky, a silhouette of palm trees against a fiery sunset, shot from the balcony, outside room 251, the horizon glowing as if the world itself were offering a kind of blessing, or maybe a goodbye. Some time after the shutter clicked, they left the motel for good. Joe had written directions on a scrap of paper, and with those in hand, they got into the car and headed off. Toward the bay, towards something no one could have predicted. They would never return to that room, and they would never see the sun again. That weekend, Hal Rogers kept glancing at the driveway, waiting for the car to appear. Every time he stepped out of the milking parlor, his eyes would drift towards the house, toward the spot where the Calais should have been parked. He told himself not to overthink it, but he kept looking anyway. Joe had said they'd be home by Saturday, Sunday at the latest. She had her midnight shift coming up. Michelle's summer classes were about to start. They had responsibilities, routines, things to get back to. There wasn't much room for delays. He told himself they'd just gotten sidetracked, taken a longer route home, maybe found one last place to explore. He even joked to a friend, "They're probably just dinking around somewhere." But even as he said it, the words didn't sit right in his mouth, because this wasn't like Joe. Joe was many things, spontaneous, strong-willed, independent, but she wasn't careless. She wasn't late. She didn't leave him wondering. If something had changed, she would have called. She always called. As Sunday slipped into Monday, the silence started to weigh heavier. And Hal, standing there alone, asking himself the question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Where were they? And that's where we're going to leave it for today, with Hal Rogers standing in that driveway, looking down a gravel path that would never bring his wife and daughters home again. Because here's the thing. Up until this point, this is still a family vacation story. It's tinged with pain and shadow, yes, but there's still light in it. There's still laughter over dinner. There's still postcard jokes. There's still the last sunset photo, the kind you'd expect to see in any scrapbook. But in less than 24 hours, that light is going to be swallowed whole. On the next episode, we'll learn how the bodies were discovered, the clues that led the police to their identities, and the early days of the investigation that seemed to lead to a dead end. Thanks for tuning in, you guys. I'll be back for part 2 very soon. But until then, please stay safe and go forth and be amazing.